It's my pleasure to introduce Scott McMichael, Managing Director for Improving. Scott, the virtual floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Max, and welcome to our virtual guest, family, and friends. Let me start with some introductions of our esteemed panelists who've agreed to come out and be vulnerable, be honest, be truthful about what it means to have some IT failure. So first up, Jay Spears. He is our VP of IT at CEC Entertainment, dedicated to creating positive, lifelong memories for families through fun. Wow, what a great purpose statement, Jay. Trevor Morris. Hey, Trevor, CEO of Fresh Bite, customer service organization that specializes in software for the wholesale distribution industry. And my colleague, Devlin Liles from Improving Houston, a technology services firm deeply rooted in our commitment to establishing trust. Please welcome, with your virtual round of applause, our panelists for today. All right, guys, let's dive in. First portion of our discussion here, I'll ask each of you a little bit more of a deep dive question. Then we'll move into a little more of banter and discussion. And then finally, we'll leave time in today's session for some Q&A. So hold nothing back. Max will be monitoring throughout today's session your questions and comments, and we'll try to get to some of that discussion at the very end. So question one, Jay Spears, let's go straight to you. Forbes published an article just last year on the top 3 reasons why big technologies fail about 2/3 of the time. Their conclusion, look at definition, scope, and management problems, but don't look too closely at problems with talent, executive support, and corporate culture. They're nearly impossible to solve. How do you react to this?
That's a great question. I tell people all the time, you can't boil the ocean and expect that to be a successful project. So scope and maybe capability for the scope you've chosen is clearly important, but these people issues are always at the root of real success or real failure, right? If you're afraid to address issues or afraid to address the relative competence of a team to deliver something, you're planning for failure. I say all the time, are we planning to fail? Because if that's our goal, we're on track by not addressing these things, right? You've got to face it and stare it down and make a choice, right? A project that is terminated because it's going to fail, but doesn't waste all your money, could be seen as a success in some ways. But if you go all the way to the end, spend all the money, time, and resources and get nothing, you've really delivered a solid failure.
Well said. Trevor, let's take a different slice of the same question. Projectmanagement.com reports that the top 3 reasons projects fail are scope creep, over-allocated resources, and poor communication. Is this your experience with your teams?
Yeah, well, first of all, talking about IT failures, how I was this close to missing because I couldn't even log into this thing. So perfect example. No, listen, guys, poor communication. I can't stress that enough. It's amazing how we can literally write things down to a customer, say, this is what you are going to get. This is what we are going to do. And somehow between what they perceive we're going to do and even what our developers think our customers have agreed what they want, things just fall apart. Communication is huge. And then the scope creep of, listen, we're going to go from A to C here and do this for you. But you know what? Since we're going from A to C, we could very easily go all the way to Q. It'll only cost you triple, something, things just snowball all the time.
Well, Devlin, we've promised our audience big failures and creative solutions today. How do we flip the odds? Preparing for today's session as moderator, over and over again, the research leads to 60 to 80% of the time IT projects failing. How do we flip the odds? How do we start applying some of these lessons learned?
Right after we solve world peace, we'll figure out IT project success. I think it's one of those where we have to approach it differently because ultimately each person's bringing their kind of their specialty to the table and their opinions and their worldviews, and people are messy. And so we've got to start approaching technology projects and implementations as people problems, not technology problems. I cannot think of an example in which the technology is the thing that failed, where it was like, yeah, that's technically not possible. But the number of times where people were the root of that failure because they heard or understood something, they had a personal agenda, they had a chip on their shoulder, they had to fight for their piece of it. Those are far more common. I got a few hundred of those examples. So I'll bring the failure. I'll deliver a solid failure, like Jay said, and you guys can deliver the creative solutions.
Trevor, I asked Devlin about creative solutions and applying some lessons learned, because I sit in postmortems and it sounds a lot like the same mistakes over and over again. It's pretty excruciating. Has that been your experience? And what do you think has been the key to failure, and specifically, and the key to turning some of that around?
Again, I can't stress enough about communication, how, making sure everybody understands what the goal is up front. What are we trying to accomplish, and the manner in which we need to do it. That is, to me, the big thing is the communication between ourselves and the clients, like I said, us and the team itself. And then who's overseeing that? Who's making sure that we're on task, we're on schedule? I remember years ago what they referred to as the iron triangle. You can do things better, faster, cheaper. Pick two. That's the key. Which one is the most important? Which two are the most important? And just figuring that out.
Jay, bringing you back to the conversation here, is there a key factor that you think you've begun to apply to sort of unlock maybe some of the poor communication channels or some of the people issues that we stumble over? What's your biggest point of advice here?
I think fear drives a lot of that. My CFO says when I joined, he said, I don't need any watermelon projects where they're green on the outside and red on the inside. He said, come to us with the truth and we'll work with you to get to the right answer. And I've instilled that over and over in my career since I learned that lesson earlier. But I love the watermelon saying, right? It's critical that people are honest about the success, the progress, the deliverables, how it's going, so that people can adjust. Nobody knows you're over allocated if you keep saying everything's fine, right? Nobody knows you're behind schedule if you say we just need one more day. You have to just say, hey, this is off track and here's what I need. Here's what I think the next steps are, or I don't know what to do, help me. All of those are good answers.
I had a executive sponsor say to me one time, hey, the project manager on this project is doing a great job. The methodology is clearly outlined. We get status reports every Friday at 5 p.m. on the nose, and I think we're being led right off the cliff. Devlin, all the right communication, but maybe the wrong direction. I take exception to executive support not being a part of the solution, the right level of involvement. What do you say?
I agree. I think there's a mixture that we need for executive involvement. We need kind of the people who are approving the budget and spending the money to have a clear understanding of what it's being spent on and that we're doing it well. But I think as a culture, we have slowly eroded the perceived value of management. Like, it's almost a bad word now, but it's incredibly valuable when done well. I would say that in your example, like, yeah, we were following the process, but nobody was managing it, right? Managing it is standing up in front of it and going, no, I'm getting all the right indicators, but it doesn't match the value delivery. We have a problem. Let's dig in and solve it. And that's that watermelon, right? It's that nuance, that understanding that I've seen a few of these, and these are the hallmarks of failure in how you're communicating, not what you're delivering, not whether you're following the process, right? It's the interesting piece of like, when you talk about space flight and sending somebody to Mars, like we don't lay out a great plan, launch the rocket and pray. Like we're gonna adjust as we go because something is gonna go wrong. If I've got a project where nothing's going wrong, nobody's looking in the right corners. And that's where I think an executive sponsor can really push the team to surface failure easily, surface it quickly. But we've got to, as that executive sponsor, not treat bad feedback as a crisis because it incentivizes people to hide it. It's like, it's not a failure of you as a project manager that something went wrong. I'm just glad you're paying attention. Now let's go fix it.
It is a bad plan that admits no modification. Some philosopher said that. So you can find that and chat it up for us. Trevor, let's continue this role of executive sponsor, guidepost, if you will, in your CEO role. You're sponsoring maybe several projects, maybe dozens of projects, maybe sometimes it feels like 100. What have you found is your greatest role in keeping the North Stars the North Stars?
We're managing a number of different teams. We've got a legacy product. We've got a new upgraded product. We have handheld devices. So we have a number of different teams. A lot of it is managing, and I think, Devlin, you said a few minutes ago, managing egos, making sure that nobody is, impeding on somebody else or feels slighted, or, hey, I want to be on that team and I'm only on what, it's funny. We had years ago, we hired someone by the name of Les Pinter, and he is famous for inventing Microsoft Word. The story is he sold Microsoft Word to Bill Gates over a grilled cheese sandwich. And we hired him to help rewrite one of our programs. One of our internal developers said, oh, he's no good. He doesn't know what he's doing. I can't work with him. Really? Really? So, a lot of times it's just managing your teams and making sure that everybody is aligned and focused on the same goal. What's that? A rising tide rises all ships, lifts all boats. So that's one of the big keys, is managing everybody and making sure they see the vision.
Jay, maybe a same version of that, or same question, a little different version. Role of executive sponsorship. When have you seen it work effectively and how?
I think that story Trevor just told is a great illustration of getting people lined up to go someplace together and having them focus on that outcome. And that's really a critical part of executive leadership, is to tell the story of why we're doing something, where we're going, what it will be like when we get there, and sell that. And that storytelling capability, it's funny, I stumbled on this article 19 years ago to this week, really, at KPMG, this Harvard Business Review article. Max, you can throw that in the chat for everybody if you want. And it's the power of storytelling in business. And no PowerPoint, no perfect dashboard, no Word document is going to deliver the inspiration, enthusiasm, and the togetherness of we're going to go solve a problem as a group that a good story can. And this same article really brings to light the reason I agreed to even do this talk today, because the bad stories are also critical signposts for you. I think there's a lot of people who'd like to tell how I won the World Series or the Super Bowl, but not many people tell you how they dropped the pass that lost it and what they learned from that and how they later won the Super Bowl because they learned their lesson, right? Those stories go together. The where we're going and why, and the watch out for the snake pit vipers on the way. Those are all important, and that's one of the things I want to talk about today. But that is a critical aspect of that executive sponsor leadership, to get everybody together going in one direction.
Devlin, current audience withstanding, a favorite lesson learned from a project sponsor, someone who sort of figured out how to make sure we stay on track?
So I'm gonna layer onto what Jay said, because I think storytelling is amazing. I had a product owner one time, and I think he actually presented at Edge, Wade, and he introduced something that I was like, that's a little hippie for me. I'm not very hippie. He introduced this idea that we were going to have story time before sprint planning, in which he would bring in the key stakeholder of the stories that were prioritized, or he would tell the stories himself and explain why and how that was going to impact the lives of the people using the software. It had nothing to do with the technical implementation, but it made us amazingly more effective, because you'd hear arguments 3, 4, 5 days into the sprint, be like, I didn't hear that in Wade's story. Are you just inventing things? You think you're smarter than the customer now? And it was phenomenal because it brought us together and it gave us this kind of lighthouse to guide against. And that wouldn't have worked in a functional spec. It wouldn't have worked in Jira or Azure DevOps, but it worked when we were all sitting around and understanding the shoes people were going to walk through. So I'd say that's probably my favorite.
That is great. So Trevor, I've written down Jay Watermelon's Devlin story time. You and I have got a few minutes to come up with a zinger.
I guess so.
Executive escalation for just a moment, then we'll move off this topic. I think sometimes people do feel like the boss doesn't want to hear that, or the executive sponsor only wants to hear green news, whether or not they've told the watermelon story or not, Jay. But it's imperative, right? And I think sometimes it's very complicated what gets escalated. What can we tell our audience today about good techniques you've seen for escalating at the right time with the right level of information?
So I'll dive in on this one. I've got a buddy who's a pilot, and he's given me one of my absolute favorite phrases. When the map and the terrain differ, always believe the terrain. Because the mountain's not going to lie to you. And unfortunately, when we start talking about project reports and things like all green and all that, it's like, no, we're saying the map is true, but the reality is very, very different. I don't care how messy the reality is. The first step in fixing it is seeing it. And that's a hard lesson to get, especially when we're in this kind of another great HBR article, although I don't have the link handy, is Beware the Busy Manager. Because it's the idea that I'm so busy, everything's a crisis. And so I deal with even minor, hey, we've got a problem here, we're working it through, wanted you to be aware, as a crisis that I've got to dive into. And so tearing that down and going, no, we just want to see the terrain. We trust you to fly the plane, but I got to see the terrain.
I want to add to that I think we're maybe skipping over the reality that not all executive sponsors and leaders are positive people, right? There are people who, delivering any amount of bad news, they respond poorly. And I agree absolutely what Devlin just said. Face that terrain. Take it to their attention. If they can't adapt, escalate. Do not let bad leadership prevent you from succeeding by lying around quietly. That will not work. I have left, and I would rather leave a job because I spoke up than stay and fail.
Trevor, I've seen executive communication or escalation get so confusing that I'm not sure what the problem is, what the options are. I've had it described to me before like executive communication should be more like finger painting than Picasso. And that's not to say that executive sponsors are simple, but that they probably are traversing through dozens of different topics in a single calendar day. When someone brings executive escalation to you, what are you looking for to help sort out and help the problem get resolved?
Well, first of all, one of our things here is if you're going to bring a problem, you got to bring at least one solution. Okay, don't just come to me with, hey, there's a problem. Okay, what are our options? Okay. The other thing is, and anybody with kids might know, there's an old cartoon show for kids called Super Y. And I used to always, my kids used to love it. And I used to say, my biggest issue with that is at the beginning of every show, everything was a super big problem. Well, you know what? Not everything is a super big problem. There's some things that are little problems. So let's not overreact and go crazy over things that we can solve really quickly. Let's just sit down and take a breath and figure out what the actual problem is.
I'm going to remember that Super Y reference.
See, I had to have my own there, you see.
That simplifies, absolutely.
I will say one of my favorite experiences in this particular space is when you get the rare but incredibly appreciated, hey, there was this problem, we solved it this way, but I'm worried it's going to come back. Can we look at this and preventing it in the future? Like, we've had the team that was like, yeah, we had a problem. I got on Saturday, 2 a.m. I fixed it. Production's up and running. We're good, but it's likely going to come back, because to the point of like, bring a solution, not just a problem. I love the proactive approach, but also the escalation on the other end of like, the problems that were near misses are the symptoms I want to stop before they become catastrophic, right? Because as a team, we're solving those with character when there might be process and technology and organizational fixes for those. And it doesn't take many times of that stacking up before the person who can fix it at 2 a.m. on a Saturday is on vacation, and it shatters, and nobody knew that this was happening for a year.
I wonder, we sort of dove right into it, panel. And so I want to take a little bit of a step back and make sure that we're recognizing or defining what failure is. What do we mean by a big project failure? What defines failure? We've had some glimmers of that in the conversation. And I think a lot of times we talk about fail fast in modern projects. Is there a favorite failure and because of a cool lesson learned that you had?
So I'll lead off because it's the one that hurts the most. It was before my time at Improving. I was working full time at a company, and we were working on a project, and it was the death march. Everybody was working late nights, evenings, weekends, trying to get this thing Herculeanly accomplished. And we get to the end of the project, and we realize that over half of the backlog, over half the things that we were making work, weren't actually business needs. They came out of a conversation of like, it'd be cool, with the project managers over lunch one day. And there was no consumer validation. There was no market testing. There was no MVP to production. It was big bang, kind of waterfall-esque. We overspent the budget by 150%. That's not 150% budget. That's 150% over budget. And we were 18 months late because nobody thought to question the value prop from the proxies in between us and the customer. And that hurt. You get to the end of the project and you realize that you just spent evenings and weekends and hours pulling something across the line that could have been 50% lighter to carry as a team, could have been faster and better and cheaper. That hurt. And so I took away from that, there is no replacement for direct customer interaction and early validation of a product. None whatsoever.
Jay, Trevor, you have a favorite failure that comes to mind?
Go ahead, Trevor.
All right. Favorite, I guess. Back in 2012, I had just taken over here at Fresh Bite, and we were in the middle of a massive project, and my head was spinning from a lot of other issues going on. And I was in charge of this project, and the team that was working on it, I would just say to them, all right, guys, go do that and let me know. We'll have a meeting in a week. And then we would meet, and I said, great, go do that and let me know. Well, a year later, and literally $1 million later, we had nothing because there was zero oversight. It was horrific, and it was all because of a lack of just someone keeping their eye on the ball.
Jay, you're in deep thought.
Well, I think I'm going to share how I met Devlin, because I think that's one of the best failures of my career. I joined Six Flags in June of 2011, and they were in the middle of a major project to revamp their sales engine architecture that was everything from how they sold tickets and season passes to the way you're admitted to the parks. And they had been working on it for about, I'm going to say 16 months when I arrived, and they were planning to roll out the e-commerce engine in September. And I got on the project, was sort of following along and looking at where we were and what had been delivered and what we were about to do. And we had delivered something the size of an acorn, and we were about to add on something the size of the moon next to it, right? And I went to the CIO and I said, hey, I know you've been doing this for 18 months, but I don't think this thing's ready to go live on e-commerce. I don't think we've done adequate scale testing, performance testing. I'm concerned. And he goes, hey, it's going to be fine. We've been doing this for 18 months. It's going to go great. And so we put it in production in September and took it out on October 11th. I think it was a Sunday when I called him and said, one of us is going to get fired the next 2 weeks if we don't stop. And we reeled this thing in, rolled back to the old architecture. And 2 weeks later, I was in the boardroom. I was the only non-VP in the room. And the COO is leading the meeting. And he says, tell us what happened. And I got some great advice on being concise in meetings like this and being clear about the problem and the opportunity. And I went in there and I told him, I said, hey, we engineered this in a way that is not going to be successful. And I need $800,000, maybe $1 million, and about 6 months to solve this problem. And the COO said, we believe in you. We want to do this. What do I need to get out of your way so that you can be successful in the next 6 months? And I said, I don't want to hear anything about the old system while we do this. And with Devlin and some improvers, we put together a great team that came in and crushed this thing. And the CFO stopped me about a year later and said, you took what I thought was the biggest waste of $4 million and turned it into the single best asset this business owns. And it's a real compliment for the ability to turn around a failure if you're given the right opportunity and those resources. And we had everything go right in the second part of that, pretty much. Not that it was also without problems, mistakes, challenges. We did an incremental park rollout starting in May that following year that was completely rolled out in time for the big season pass sale in September. And they've ridden that pony for years now. But that lesson of overconfidence, under testing, and I was honest about my concern, but I did not ring the bell everywhere. I could have warned other people and maybe not spent 6 weeks in production, maybe just spent 2, right? There were still things we could have done better, even once the failure started. And that failure cost us on the last Sunday, probably cost us $1 million on that single day.
Wow. And one of the takeaways I hear in that story is indeed the sort of clear, concise ask that you had with some confidence on what it would take to right the ship, as opposed to just laying the problems at the feet of someone. So good on you. Trevor, do you guys?
Can I just say one more thing, Scott?
By all means.
The other thing that I think was absolutely amazing is that I was in a group of executives who were only interested in improving the outcome. They didn't need somebody to punish. They didn't need somebody to fire. They didn't need a scapegoat. They were looking for the success. And you don't always get that, but when you find yourself with those kinds of people, hang on, because you're going someplace good.
Yeah. Well said.
Finding folks who truly believe that you are going to be judged by how you deal with failure, not the existence of failure, is a rare thing to cherish. The folks who judge you for failure ever existing are begging to be lied to.
Trevor, do you, in your teams today, do you have some version of post-mortem, project review, retrospectives, and tell us what's worked the best?
The big thing is and the first thing that comes to mind is not necessarily from an IT standpoint, but we have, when our software goes live at a client site, we'll have staff there for sometimes a week. And when they come back, we want to know, okay, what went right, what went wrong, what could have been better? Did we need more staff on site? Were they properly trained? Was everything set up ahead of time? Did you show up and things weren't ready, which is on us. So, but a big key there is obviously the setup ahead of time. So, a post-mortem is important, but just as important is the setup ahead of time. Hopefully, if things are done appropriately and you've checked all the boxes ahead of time, the post-mortem should be a quick down and dirty just to make sure that there was nothing horrible that happened. Now, to Devlin's point, yes, there's always going to be something that goes wrong. It's like your wedding. You're going to have one issue that arises, and hopefully that's mitigated. But that post-mortem is huge, especially to make sure that, at the end of the day, it's all about the customer. So if the customer isn't happy for whatever reason, we got to know why.
Jay, go ahead.
No, I was saying just one. Never been on a project or a wedding that had just one project.
Do you guys have a post-mortem project review process that you insist on and do success or failure? Jay, what's working well?
Yeah, I think every project close deserves maybe a couple of meetings, right? I like to do one at the team level, preferably off-site. Sometimes lubrication helps, a little alcohol, but I like to get a lot of that out. And sometimes you learn about small problems that were dealt with below you. And at the larger scale with the executive team, win or lose, talk about what we learned, right? The lessons that you can, I say this all the time. When you win, you don't tend to look at the 3 questions you failed on, right? You get an A on the exam, you just ignore those 3 questions. I think win or lose, it's really valuable to do that review and understand what worked and what didn't, and how you can be a better winner the next time, or less likely to lose, whichever way you want to, roll that card. So I think it's valuable to do that detailed debrief and an executive debrief about the real business value. And we were talking about failures. You can deliver the project and fail because it misses the mark or the ROI, or you can spend a lot of money and fail outright. Those tend to be more rare today, in my experience, than those projects that get implemented but didn't really create any additional business value or savings or sales or whatever. Those are the ones, to me. Not only do you need to look at it and say, is this better than where we were? And are we spending less money than we were? Because you can still go back to the old place and make money.
Devlin, round us out on this topic.
Yeah, I definitely, failure, if you look at like the Chaos Manifesto, both times, right? They talk about overscale or overscope, over budget, or failure to deliver ROI as kind of the 3 big buckets of failure. I think we see that bucket shift over the last 15 to 20 years, right? The massively over scope, the never into production ROI side of it, that happens often. I think we're still seeing a ton of scope creep. Over budget, we've gotten a little bit more culturally okay with like, hey, does this justify its cost anymore, or do we abort the project, right? With lean startup and some of those things. So that helps. But I would say that failure is, for me, when I look at it, not necessarily a bad word unless it's permanent, right? Like when you look at the choices we make when failure happens, right? Getting righteously indignant, the blame game, those kind of things, you're making failure permanent. But if we can go, hey, it didn't work that time, but we're going to go over here and we're going to try it again. We're going to do these things different. That makes sense to me. And the round out of process, right? When somebody leaves a project, like they wrap up their role on it, or the project itself wraps, going through and capturing, like we've got I think it's a 3-page form of like, what was the business problem? What was the technology solution that was proposed? What actually ended up getting implemented? What was the business outcome? What are lessons learned that we can share publicly? And what are the things that are internally we got to go fix because they went way off the rails? And some of those are personal, some of those are technical, some of those are process, but it gives us this kind of consistent backlog to make cool new problems happen tomorrow. Like today's problems are boring. Like I want cool new ones tomorrow.
We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A, and the first one sort of takes our esteemed panel back into your hands-on days. How have your failures as team members, as consultants on a project, as doer team members, how have those failures back in those days made you react to failures in your current positions as leaders? Who'd like to go first?
I'll jump in real quickly. I remember way back when, one of the first things that I learned was, and I've tried to instill this moving forward, is it's okay to make a mistake. It's not okay to make the same mistake twice. And that's something that, has just, when it was told to me, it was huge, because it's okay. Mistakes are going to happen. Learn from them and just don't make the same mistake twice.
Well said. Jay, Devlin?
Yeah, I think I'll follow Trevor and say I think that is solid advice. I think that for me, how my demeanor in hearing and coaching on those things is really important. Short of injuries and death, right? You need to keep those reactions in the scale of the problems and the whole business solution you're solving, right? The other thing I learned is make sure they learn to fish. Don't fish for them. Don't answer the question. Give them the question that leads them to the answer they're looking for. Those kinds of things I think pay off in spades when you're developing people and growing them to be the best professional they can be.
And Devlin?
So rounding that out, I'm going to share a story from when I met Jay. So I ran over quite a few of the members of that team. Like it was a team effort, and they did amazing things, went on for years to record level profits for that company, like massive outcomes. I ran roughshod over that team, and it was needed, but I could have done it better. Like I could have included more people, but we needed to move a lot of things quickly, and I didn't have the skills to do that well. And so I chose an outcome that was better, but not great. Like it was not the potential it could have been. And it took me years to go fix it, but it taught me that yesterday's solutions cause today's problems. That's okay. Everything we're solving today, every technical problem we're solving is caused by the fact that we survived to get here. Somebody laid the groundwork and foundation to get us here. We don't have to devalue the past to talk about a better future. And that lesson in dealing with failure, it's like, no, we're not going to talk about, like, we're going to go up the scale. We're not going to focus on people. We're not going to focus on the problem. We're going to focus on a future we want to build, knowing that someday, probably fairly quickly, somebody's going to be sitting there and going, what were they thinking? This is a horrible idea. And they're going to have the privilege of saying that because of the solutions we put in place today.
The early 1900s, the automobile was touted in the New York Times as the solution to pollution because horse poop was the problem at the time. Exactly what Devlin said.
Wow, Jay, I didn't know you went that far back in project.
Pretty old. I don't look like I'm pretty old.
It's a lot of experience. Fear of failure, I've heard it said, does not in fact prevent the failure. Or does not necessarily prevent the failure from happening. I've also heard it said, hey, or a philosophy that I've seen used is, was your heart in the right place, right? We needed to sort of innovate or trudge into new paths, but was your heart in the right place, or did you make a selfish, lazy, non-team oriented decision? Man, if your heart was in the right place, then let's just get back on there. And as Trevor pointed out, not make that same mistake again. Second question out of the Q&A, what's the main thing you hear from an IT professional today that immediately makes you lose trust in them or immediately makes you trust them more?
I'll go first here. I will say that I always find value in people who can say, I don't know. And the higher in this skill group you go, the harder it is to find that sometimes. Or let me ask Bob, he's the expert, or Kathy, she knows way more about this than me. I love that when people are honest about what they do and don't know. And the flip side of that is integrity problems, basically lying, right? If you find somebody's lied to you, it's very hard and a long road to rebuild that trust. But the first step in that is calling it out privately and telling them, I know the truth about this, and I need you to always be truthful with me if we're going to work together.
Yeah, I mean, I just to piggyback on that, I mean, you know, I don't know necessarily ahead of time, but I can tell you while working with someone, you know, shifting blame and, oh, I couldn't have done that. It was some, well, but no, we know you did. It doesn't matter. Let's just fix the problem. And I can't stand the finger pointing and back and forth, you know, owning up to something and the integrity, as Jay mentioned, is it can't go far enough. I mean, that is it.
Absolutely. I was sitting here thumbs upping because I think it's fantastic. And I agree. I will say that there's one piece, and it happens more for IT professionals than it does for folks who are more people or business centric. And it is when I hear them espousing that the technology is the answer to a people problem, I start trusting their opinion less, because I've yet to see a tool solve a people problem, right? Like, just getting the technology perfect isn't going to make the product more successful. It's not going to make adoption faster. Like, the product needs to be good, but we could spend an infinite amount of time building the architectural, like, golden castle, ivory tower version, and probably destroy whatever business value it had in the process. And so when I hear the kind of naivete of technology for technology's sake, it's the ends, it's the means, it's everything in the equation, it makes me question their judgment pretty hard. And then on the game,
Zoom, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, are you saying Zoom hasn't made us more collaborative as a world?
I don't think so. Most of my Zoom meetings or Teams meetings or Google Hangouts or whatever have become more transactional because people. But the one thing I hear that makes me trust them is when I get respectful, candid feedback. Like, I have one example where I was dead set on a direction, and one of the folks I work with, Jake, pulls me aside like 2 days after the meeting to decide it and goes, hey, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I strongly disagree with where you're going, and I think you should reconsider. And he laid out his plan, and I was like, you're right, we'll change. But it was the willingness to kind of truth to power type. He did it right. He did it privately. He put thought into it, but it was phenomenal. And it's that moment of like, I can trust you with big things because you're willing to call me when I'm wrong.
If I can add one thing to that, and I agree with you 1000%, but there's a flip side to that as well, which is years ago, an IT company that we were looking at, and I've actually started to use this, is technology isn't always the answer. If you have, and when I say you, if our clients, and if we also as a company have personnel issues, have process issues, have things that are not working, throwing technology into the mix and thinking that that's a silver bullet is just going to make things infinitely worse. There has to be a solution. And when someone said that to me, hey, before you put in this technology piece, you got to fix your in-house issues first. And that's huge, because technology, yes, it's great, and Zoom and everything else, but it's not going to solve your issue if you've got process issues.
Yeah. You can use technology to speed up failure dramatically if you need to.
Yeah.
I was going to actually ask the question, have any of you experienced project failure where pointing at technology selection itself was the problem, to sort of bring this to a point?
So a project I worked on, the entire ROI of the project was on labor savings, right? It was, they would be able to, rather than have 20 people doing a job, have 4 people doing that same job. So they didn't have to keep hiring tons and tons of people in a warehouse. And we chose a stack of technologies not knowing that, and slowed the process down. They actually had to hire twice as many people to do the job. It was like, well, we missed that one. And like, it ended up literally at the end of it, they're like, yeah, we can't install this. Its entire ROI is making this part super fast. And the right answer was a Big Chief tablet and a pencil and a data entry clerk. It was like, okay, we don't need tech. Like, this is easy. We were trying to like deliver handhelds and like Motorola 9090s, and it was the wrong answer, because we came at it from a technology perspective, right? If I'm feeling sick and I go to an oncologist, they're going to look for cancer because that's their thing. You go to a technologist with a problem, we will over design that thing like crazy.
It's funny. We might have been working on the same project, because we had, or we still have, a client up in Toronto, and they had a huge warehouse, and they wanted their pickers, when they were picking produce, were just always mispicking. So, okay, we came up with a solution where we're going to have statistics. We're going to let them know, okay, this picker made this incorrect pick, and this was wrong, and he messed up this many times an hour. Well, all that meant was they were working twice as slowly to make sure that they got everything correctly. So now, if the product wasn't there, they would literally just sit on the floor of the warehouse waiting for someone to fulfill that slot, because they weren't going to pick something else, because that was going to, mess up their statistics. Yeah, that didn't take very long to rip out.
Jay, anything to add on that sort of technology is not always the problem or the solution?
Yeah, well, we started out, we talk about people, process, and technology, and people design the process, people choose the technology. If the people aren't on track, the rest of it's not going to solve any of the problems. You've got to deal with that first.
There's one more topic I want to get into, and we'll go to a couple of Q&A, and that is around product ownership, or what is sometimes that blurry line between the IT professionals, the IT leadership, the technical lead, the technical choices, and the business sponsorship, the business requirement. And even if there's not conflict between them, there may be blurry lines. Have you learned some things in your experiences that'll help our audience understand that distinction in role of product owner?
I'll say I like the blurry lines. I don't mind technology people getting in the business and being sure they understand what they're delivering. And I don't mind product owners getting in the scrum room and understanding how sausage gets made, because it makes both groups smarter. But the decision to spend resources belongs to your product owner. Where we're going to invest, where the business value is, ultimately, right or wrong, that's their accountability and their responsibility. So as Devlin was saying, if you end up with a backlog with a bunch of stuff the developers put in there, you're in trouble right off the bat. It might be good stuff to do, but you need your business owner supporting it.
Absolutely. And I'll tack onto this one of, I find that often 15 years ago me is screaming at me, because I used to believe that if I just taught the business technology, everything would get easier. Like if it wasn't for those pesky users, our software would be perfect. And it's the biggest change in me is that perspective of it's not incumbent upon the business to learn the nuance of technology. It is incumbent upon me as a technologist to learn the language of business. If I hear from our team or from our clients, like, the business doesn't want me doing unit testing, we can't spare the time. You're making the wrong argument. Oh, well, yeah, we've got standard laptops and they won't get us better ones. Like you're making the wrong argument. I can guarantee you're making the argument of we need faster and all this. Put it in business terms. It took all of one example of, hey, it takes 12 minutes to build the software on my laptop. If I replace it with an SSD rather than a spinning disk, it takes 45 seconds. Scaled out by the 130 people that are on this project, you're wasting $250,000 a month. The CIO had the laptops ordered the next week and took a victory lap for the cost savings. If technologists want the business to move, we've got to move them with the measures they use for success, not for us. Retiring technical debt might not be a good idea, but if you believe it is, what's the business return on that investment? And that's the piece I think that's the biggest shift for me is we got to communicate back the other direction. To Jay's point, learning the business language and what drives it.
Yeah, I can't agree more with both of those. We have developers and sitting in an office with your head down is great. You'll get a lot accomplished, but if you don't know what the customers are dealing with on a daily basis, it's pointless. And all too often we used to hear, well, it's just 2 more clicks to get from here to there. Well, multiply that by, so many people, so many orders, you're talking hours of extra time and extra clicks, and it's not feasible. And it's not until we took our project manager on site to a customer to see that there are lines of people, they're having to key in orders, 10 keying like a lightning bolt. Extra clicks matter. And to that point, you've got to understand what the customer is dealing with. You can't be in a bubble.
And be confident in doing so, for sure.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's great stuff. We've got one more question from the audience that I think is a good one to wrap up on, and is well stated. How do you all model failure that is? Oh, I just lost my question. How do each of you model the behavior that failure is okay and that failure is a thing that we can push through? Saying it is one thing, but modeling that with your teams and in your organizations.
I will.
Well, go ahead, Devlin. You go first.
I'll start out on this one. Vulnerability starts with us, and it needs to, right? Because it's not enough to talk only about the successes and the awards and the all of those things. We have to talk about our failures, and it has to be us, right? We can't point at somebody else's failure and go, yeah, over there, Bob failed, but now he's a success, because that's ingenuine. But when I talk to new improvers, I'm like, yeah, you're going to be removed from a client at some point. It happens in every consultant's career. My first client punted me out the door after 3 weeks, and I'm still here. And I'm still here because of how I dealt with it. The story can't end at failure. We've got to tell the follow-on of what we did to deal with it and model the right response to failure as well. But we've got to start with us. And that hurts a little bit. Like I have some identity tied into being a very good consultant and being successful. And so openly admitting my faults and failures is painful. But if I want our teams to do that, I got to start there.
Yeah, I think I started this a minute ago when I said you got to hear those problems and failures with a calm demeanor. You're not looking to punish somebody. Don't punish the failure, right? Don't punish the person. Use it as an opportunity. And on the outside, this praise in public, scold in private, some of that. But on the outside, I always respect some of the great coaches tell you to, when you win, say the team won, and when you lose, say I failed, right? And that's important for them to see me stand in front and say, yes, I failed. I did not get this done, and not push that downhill. Those two things can really open the door for people knowing they can trust you, that they can bring you a problem and maybe a solution, whether you use it or not, and not be the victim of that exposition.
You know, the only thing I can add to that is it's tough to say this without sounding arrogant, so I apologize up front. But a lot of times when we have a new employee here, I'll say, listen, guys, you're starting out here, you know, I have my executive team and, you know, we're all, I would say, moderately successful. Every decision we have ever made in our entire lives, good, bad, or indifferent, led us to this point. So you can't have gotten here without making mistakes. We're not perfect.
Yeah.
So we made mistakes and we're still sitting here, which means that mistakes can still lead you to a good place.
Well said.
Statement.
There's one last question maybe we can squeeze in as we wrap up. Devlin, I think, carried us down a path of speaking to leadership with terms that actually mean things to leadership. Where are those learned?
So we teach basics of corporate finance to just about everybody because we share profitability and EBITDA and revenue and those kind of things. We're actually going to be kicking off a series here in Houston, teaching them publicly in the ION and the innovation space and all that. So find those places. Like you could watch YouTube University, like understand the basics of corporate finance. Because if you understand how your business makes money and you understand how your business spends money, most of us can fill in the gaps in between as technologists of going, oh, so here's how my product plays into that. If you don't have that, ask your product owner. It'll probably be the happiest day in their life to sit down and explain the business justification to a technologist. I know when I sat down and was like, hey, how do we make money? I got an hour racetrack course on corporate finance and how we made money.
I think there's an element of experience, and I, having worked in, what am I, on my 14th company, they're not all the same, right? So I would tell you, know your audience, know who you're talking to, and the business terms they're comfortable with. Marketing and finance do not speak about these in exactly the same way. But if you can learn their terminology and keep your answer concise. One of the another failure story. I was going to a executive meeting in place of my CIO because he was on vacation and we'd had a disastrous failure. And I had prepared my 8-slide deck to explain how the problem occurred, what exactly the problem was, the complete resolution. And I stopped in to our CMO and said, hey, I got to go in there in 30 minutes and cover this. Can you give me some advice? And he looked at my whole deck and he goes, just the last slide where it says this is never going to happen again. That's all they really need to know. That's all they really want to know. And that you've got it covered because they believe in you. Go in there and tell them it's over and it'll never happen again. And you're done. And I was in and out in 30 seconds.
Tip on business language, Trevor?
Listen, the only thing that I can add to that is always just, and there's no way to say it, just keep your word. In other words, if we're going to say we're going to do something, you know, and this was it wasn't an IT failure, but it was a failure of mine just as in the CEO world, was over-promising and under-delivering to my own staff, meaning I said we were going to do X, Y, Z, and maybe we just did X. I mean, you've got to know what their wants are and follow through. And that's something that is just key. It's just that follow through. Because just like you know, what Jay said with regard to IT companies, if you lie to once, if they lie to you once, it's hard to get that trust back. Same thing with your staff. I mean, it's hard to get them to believe you once you've really screwed the pooch once, if not multiple times.
Yeah, there's a lot of humility in just saying, hey, I've got a lot of technical gobbledygook going through my brain right now. Can you help me tease this out, understand how this would be, how this business problem sounds to your ears? And so, I think Devlin's right. There's a lot of pretty good people out there who want their products to be a big success. And so, virtual round of applause for all of the tips, tricks, transparency, and experience that this panel has offered us today. Jay, Trevor, Devlin, thank you very much for your candor and care for project success, and many successes, future successes to all of our audience members. I hope you learned a little something today and that we can contribute as a part of the Improving Edge. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.